Hello dear aspiring pilot. If you clicked on this video, I assume you are interested in the first-person view flight. This video is about learning first-person view flight, also known as FPV. With a small tiny whoop drone. If you've been wanting to fly FPV for a long time but don't know how to go about it, or if you've already started but stopped in frustration, then this video is for you. Come on, let's do this together. I'll help you with this video. In this video you have the opportunity to learn from a professional and benefit from my extensive experience of over 10 years of model flying with airplanes, helicopters and FPV. I also ran a small model flying school for over 3 years. During this time I was able to gain a lot of experience in how to efficiently train prospective pilots of different age groups to become good and independent pilots. A lot of work went into this video, so let my work not be in vain. Start flying FPV now. You can do it easily with my help. Watch the whole video and tell me about your successes and difficulties from your training in the comments. Give me feedback. And if you like the video and the video has value for you, then give me something back so that I can continue to be motivated to make videos like this. Share the video with your friends and tell them about it. And share it on social media. Like and subscribe to this channel is also a way to show me that you are satisfied with my work. Always remember that there is only one person behind this channel. A person who also has to make sure that he stays motivated. If enough comes back in some form, then I will ensure that my learning videos remain free. Now let's learn to fly FPV together. But be warned, after this video it's only up to you. Then you no longer have any excuses not to start flying FPV. First-person view flying, also known as FPV flying, is not as difficult as some people think. It is significantly easier than line-of-sight flying, which is also called LOS flying. I also made a how-to tutorial about flying LOS, which you can find on my channel. Although FPV flying is easier to learn than LOS, it is still worth taking a structured approach. I try to give you this structure and inspiration for the training process in this video. Then it is possible for everyone to learn, at least for anyone who has the necessary patience and time. The total effort can vary depending on your learning ability, which also has to do with age or brain health, and your goal. If your goal is a simple sightseeing flight, this can be accomplished within 1 to 2 weeks. For simple aerobatics it takes between 6 and 12 months, and for the maximum possible aerobatics it takes around 1 to 3 years if you train daily. These are basic values from my experience as a model flight instructor and from the observations and information of my friends. Basically, the more and more actively, or, in other words, more intelligently you train, the faster you will reach your goal. Daily training would be optimal, even if sometimes they are just short sessions of 15 minutes. The minimum is 3 times a week. If you only have time once a week, then it becomes difficult. At this point I would like to say something important. You should definitely set your goal realistically, because you will need motivation to get through the sometimes boring learning time. And this motivation comes from small experiences of success from reaching intermediate goals or levels. That's why you should set your main goal realistically in relation to the amount of time you're willing to invest. And then you should divide this final goal into intermediate goals or exercises or levels. This ensures that your brain always gets small experiences of success and that you can maintain your motivation. This is very important because without motivation nothing happens. The small experiences of success that are, so to speak, the fuel that ignites the fire of passion. Once the burn is big and strong, you can allow yourself to take breaks and endure longer periods without feeling successful. But in the beginning you have to be very careful to maintain motivation. For me this was possible with the exercises I did. These exercises were like levels in a game, and every time I completed an exercise I had the feeling of a small success. I will introduce you to the exercises in this video. Some of these exercises are a must and others are optional, or you can invent your own exercises. The only important thing is that they motivate and challenge you. You should make sure that an exercise doesn't overwhelm you, but also that it doesn't underwhelm you, because then you won't learn anything. If it feels like your brain is being stretched, then you are on the right track. Effort is also a good guide. If you feel tired after the exercise because you had to concentrate and exert a lot of effort, then this is a good sign. For some people, music also helps them to concentrate better or to be more relaxed and productive. I learned it with and without music. Depending on your needs, music was definitely helpful for me for the boring grinding of exercises into my brain to get the necessary routine. But at the beginning of learning a new exercise, I needed rest. Now let's move on to the exercises. These are designed to slowly get your brain used to the different flight positions. And as already mentioned, they are not rigid. You can change and optimize them yourself. Basically, it's about getting used to the controls and developing fine motor skills in your fingers. And to learn to stay calm and gentle, without rushing. It's about making gentle micro-movements and learning to switch off the motors at the right moment, also known as disarming. These are the 4 main goals. If you create exercises yourself, it is important that you set visual references in advance so that you can recognize deviations quickly and reliably. Recording the video with your FPV goggles is also helpful so you can watch your flights and reflect on what you can improve in the next training session. Now I'll give you a brief overview of the first base exercises. Hover in ground effect and variations thereof. Hover out of ground effect and variations thereof. Basic sightseeing flight consisting of large, long curves where the aim is to combine and coordinate roll pitch and rudder. Cross the spacious gate and turn around to change direction of flight at a constant altitude. Rotate around the rudder axis at different heights with full control over roll pitch and rudder. Basic sightseeing flight with altitude limitation. Slalom. Slalom with height limit. Tighter curves around posts. Tighter curves around posts with height limits. A figure 8 around post with height limit. Orbits with and without height limits. Snake line or slalom in the vertical to get to know the pitch better. I recommend doing the exercises in this order, seeing them as levels in a game, so to speak. Of course, you can try going to the next exercise and then back again. But basically, these exercises are designed so that they build on each other. Completing one exercise lays the foundation for the next exercise. It sometimes makes sense to go back to an exercise every now and then to perfect it. Most people tend to want to move forward too quickly and have too little patience. So try to really work your way through the exercises or levels. After these exercises, you will basically already have mastered the basics of FPV flying. If I get enough positive feedback on this video, then I would like to do a second or third part for intermediate and advanced pilots. I also made a how-to tutorial about learning to fly LOS, which you can find on my channel. You can also find other tutorials and other interesting videos there on the subject of FPV, FPV racing and tiny whoop drones. If you are looking for something specific, then use the internal search function on this YouTube channel, or ask me in the comments. Now I'll show you the exercises in detail, one after the other. A few words again about the setup. The setup I'm showing here is not fixed. You can also do it in a smaller room, in a larger room, or outdoors. You can make the visual references yourself. You can take 4 chairs as references. You can make something with barrier tape. You can use a bush or small tree as a height reference. It doesn't matter at all. All that matters is that you practice, that you have visual reference points, and that you practice so that your brain gets to know all the control functions and can connect and coordinate them with each other. That's what it's about. A short explanation about my OSD. At the bottom left, you can see the real-time voltage of the LiPo. At the bottom left towards the middle, you can see the position of my throttle stick from 0 to 100%. The percentage needed for hovering is different for every whoop, and can also vary depending on what settings you have in Betaflight, for example Throttle Expo. But more on that later. At the bottom right, you can see the flight time since the drone was first armed. I have warnings in the middle and airplane mode at the top left. In this case ACRO mode. More on that later. A short explanation about my post-flight stats. After disarming, you can see the time that the drone was geared in total arm. At min battery you can see the minimum voltage of the battery over the entire period of the flight. At end battery you can see the last measured voltage of the battery. And with battery you can see the current voltage of the battery in real time. The G-force specification is also interesting. Here you can see what G-forces the drone was exposed to in flight. Or even in crashes. Damage to the drone is to be expected in crashes with forces above 6G. The first exercise is hover in ground effect and variations of it. This exercise is about getting to know the control function's role and pitch. This works very well in the ground effect between 5 and 10 centimeters above the ground. By slowly increasing the throttle stick, the whoop comes into the ground effect. At the beginning it may jump up and down a little, but that will calm down on its own without any action from the pilot. This also teaches you that you don't always have to react to everything immediately, and you certainly don't have to overreact. Sometimes things settle down on their own. By gently changing the throttle position again, you can adjust the height precisely. After that you can only concentrate on pitch and roll and try to keep the whoop in the starting position. This makes learning the control functions easier because you only have to concentrate on something. The goal of this exercise is to stay in the defined flight zone with gentle and controlled micro movements. However, you don't necessarily have to perfect this exercise at this point. It's okay if you can stay in the predefined flight area for more than 1 to 2 minutes. You don't have to be able to stay perfectly in the middle like I did in this video. And crashing or disarming every now and then is okay and even part of the exercise. What is also important in this exercise is that you learn to disarm the whip quickly and at the right time. This is also an important part of this exercise. This will be helpful later to minimize damage in the event of a crash. You can also develop variations of this exercise yourself. For example, you can fly forwards and backwards within a defined flight area. So fly forward, slow down, fly backwards, slow down, fly forward again, and so forth. Or you can fly from left to right and vice versa in the predefined flight area. So fly to the right, slow down, fly to the left, slow down, fly to the right again, and so forth. Or you can set up a visual center reference in the middle of the predefined flight area and then hover around it in a semicircle. Like a circle, so that you always look at this middle reference with the camera. This exercise is difficult in ground effects because you have to operate the rudder without changing the throttle. As soon as you have gotten to know the control movements and the disarming of the motors and have also learned that the control movements are very small and require fine motor skills and that you no longer have to concentrate heavily on the roll pitch stick, you can move on to the next exercise. Some people take a while in this first practice. That's completely okay, because sometimes fine motor skills have to be developed first, which sometimes requires a little patience, especially for older people or very young people. Give yourself the time you need. There's no reason to rush. I've made a few videos here that roughly show what your first flights might look like. It's difficult at the beginning, but if you learn to disarm the motors quickly at the right moment and to control them with gentle, controlled micro movements, then things will quickly get better. Don't be intimidated. At the beginning you will feel like a baby making its first attempts to walk and falling over again and again. This is completely normal and part of it, but it gets better quickly the more you practice. A few words about flight time and LiPo voltage. When hovering in the ground effect you need a little less power and can usually fly longer. However, you should never deeply discharge the LiPo, otherwise it will immediately damage it. You should never discharge a LiPo below 3 volts. Not even in flight. The voltage must never fall below 3 volts during the entire flight. You can see the voltage at the bottom left of my on-screen display. The on-screen display is also called OSD. I set the low battery warning in Betaflight to 3.3 volts and the land now warning to 3.2 volts. You can adjust these as needed. It's better to start with too high than too low to ensure that you never deeply discharge your LiPo. You can see the end screen on the OSD after the flight and after the disarm, and make sure you never went below 3 volts during the flight. At end battery and min battery you can see that it was never below 3 volts in flight, and at battery you can see the real-time voltage. If the real-time voltage recovers to over 3.3 volts then it's okay. For me the voltage after the flight is usually between 3.4 and 3.7 volts. If you decide to fly the LiPo completely empty down to a recovery voltage of 3.4 volts like I did, then you have to accept that you have to get the whoop. If you're the convenient type then it's better if you return beforehand so you don't have to get your whoop. Both together don't work. The maximum flight time and comfort together. These two don't like each other. It is important that you choose one of the two. The second exercise is hover out of ground effect and variations of it. If you have done the first exercise conscientiously, you will now be able to hover the aircraft in ground effect without having to concentrate too much on roll and pitch. This second exercise is about getting to know and coordinating the throttle and rudder and estimating the altitude. By slowly increasing the throttle stick, the whoop comes into the ground effect. In the first exercise you learn to control the aircraft just above the ground. Now you can gently increase the throttle position until you have reached a height of around 1 meter. The height reference you made will help you estimate the height. The goal of this exercise is to hover at a height of around 1 meter in a defined flight area with gentle and controlled micro-movements. However, you don't necessarily have to perfect this exercise at this point. It's okay if you can stay in the predefined flight area for more than 1 to 2 minutes. You don't have to be able to stay perfectly in the middle yet. And crashing or disarming every now and then is okay and even part of the exercise. What is also important in this exercise is that you learn to disarm the whip quickly and at the right time. This is also an important part of this exercise. This will be helpful later to minimize damage in the event of a crash. For some aspiring pilots, it is easier to fly the first and second exercises with line of sight without FPV goggles. This is a way to get used to the stick movements before putting on the FPV goggles. However, some find it easier with FPV. Here you have to find out what is easier for you, what you want to start with. Remember again and again that all control movements must be carried out gently, and that you'd rather control too little than too much, and that you disarm the engines in good time before an impact. I know it's very difficult to maintain height at the beginning, but here too, the more and more focused you practice, the faster you can learn it. Use all your senses and pay attention to the sound of the engines. This way you can detect changes in speed early on. As soon as you can approximately maintain the height, you can also incorporate variations into this second exercise. For example, vary the height. Rise from 1 meter to 2 meters height and sink back to 1 meter and so on. If you can maintain the altitude to some extent, then you can hover from left and right and vice versa, as well as from front to back and vice versa within the defined flight range. You have to be aware that you have to give a little more throttle when accelerating and reduce a little bit when braking. You can also use some throttle expo or throttle mid. You can set this via stick commands. To get to the OSD menu, if your remote control is in mode 2 like mine, you have to do the following stick combo: left stick in the middle left and right stick up. Then you come to the OSD menu. Be careful not to change anything unintentionally. At throttle expo you can then set 30%, for example, and throttle mid to 0. Be careful not to change these settings all the time. Find a setting that is roughly right and then stick with it for the next 100 lipos. You can also set up a visual sender reference in the middle of the predefined flight area and then hover around it in a semicircle, so that you always look at this middle reference with the camera. This exercise is not easy because you have to operate the rudder without changing the throttle too much if you want to keep the altitude constant. But this exercise is very useful because it allows you to coordinate all control movements at the same time. Another variation is to slowly turn yourself with the rudder while roughly maintaining the height and position. This exercise is not easy, but it is also very useful. If you can then coordinate the control movements better and better and disarm the engines quickly and automatically before the impact of a crash. And if you have also learned that the control movements are very small and require fine motor skills. And when you no longer have to concentrate hard and are no longer overreacting, then you can move on to the next exercise. Some people take a while in this second exercise. That's completely okay, because sometimes fine motor skills have to be developed first, which sometimes requires a little patience, especially for older people or very young people. Give yourself the time you need. There's no reason to rush. I know it's difficult at the beginning, but if you learn to quickly disarm the motors at the right moment and control them with gentle, controlled micro movements, then things will quickly get better. Don't be intimidated. At the beginning you will feel like a baby making its first attempts to walk and falling over again and again. This is completely normal and part of it, but it gets better quickly the more you practice. The third exercise is flying a long controlled turn in which you coordinate the throttle, pitch, roll, and rudder. The exercise begins in the hovering flight that you learned in the previous exercises. Now you can slowly move the pitch forward and increase the throttle a little so that the aircraft accelerates. Make sure that the speed is low and remains constantly low. Most pilots have a tendency to automatically go faster and faster until they crash. Therefore, pay attention to the speed and that the speed remains constant. At the entrance to the curve, you give a little roll and a little rudder and fly a long, coordinated curve. At the beginning you might crash in the first corner, but that's not a bad thing because in the previous exercises you have learned to disarm at the right moment. The most difficult thing at the beginning is to keep the height constant in the curve. That's normal. In the beginning, your aircraft may gain or lose altitude as you turn. This effect is even stronger if you haven't done the previous exercises for enough time. And if you train outdoors, it's even more difficult because of the wind. When it's windy, you sometimes don't know whether you gave the throttle unconsciously or whether it was the wind. That's why I recommend training indoors at the beginning if possible. If you don't know whether you gave the throttle unconsciously, you can record your DVR and watch it again. There you can see the throttle position in the OSD whether the throttle was constant or not. That's why it's important to have the throttle position displayed in the DVR. At some point, flying long turns becomes relatively easy and you can fly long, coordinated turns at a constant altitude. You can then vary it and, for example, fly an 8. Or you can fly around posts in an underground car park or something. The important thing is that you do everything in a coordinated and focused manner. The two biggest problems that can arise with this exercise are too little or too much throttle in the corners, or too little rudder. This is all because you can't yet operate the rudder without changing the throttle. It can also help to go back to the previous exercises and train them for longer. If you can do an exercise practically indefinitely without crashing at a moderate speed, then you have completed the exercise level and can move on to the next exercise. In the following clip I show you what the exercise can look like after a few years. The fourth exercise is crossing a large gate and turning around on the spot to change the direction of flight. This exercise is about getting used to flying under a gate, and by turning on the spot you learn to give a rudder input without changing the height. I know this is very difficult, but it is very important to learn this. This is the only way you can later fly precisely around curves and through gate combos. Always make sure you train both sides. Left rotation and right rotation. Left curve and right curve. And if one side is worse, then that is completely normal because we are all left or right-handed. But it is then important to train this side more than the other. so that in the end both sides end up doing almost equally well. During this exercise you have to be aware that you have to give a little more throttle when accelerating and reduce a little throttle when braking. And when turning on the spot you have to be careful not to change the throttle unconsciously. You have completed this exercise as soon as you can do this exercise for an entire LiPo without crashing. The better you can fly the individual exercises, the better and faster you will complete the next exercise. The fifth exercise is an exercise that you can come back to again and again. This exercise is about concentrating fully on the interaction and coordination of rudder and throttle. And at the same time you have to keep the aircraft in place with roll and pitch. In principle, in this exercise all control functions must be coordinated with one another at the same time. This exercise is one of the most important basic exercises. You can turn the aircraft on the spot with the rudder and try to maintain the height and position. But you can also climb from 1 meter to 2 meters in height. Stop there and then sink back down. You can also invent your own variations. The only important thing is that you combine all the control functions with each other and that you carry out the exercise precisely and with focus. You can also turn very slowly or faster. It is important that you never lose your orientation. You can also stop turning briefly to reorient yourself again, but at some point it should be a fluid movement with no stops in between. The sixth exercise is flying a long coordinated turn with height restrictions through gates or other restrictions such as barrier tape. You can also set up a spacious racetrack on a flat surface with large, easy curves if you have lots of gates available. The important thing in this exercise is that you learn to fly large turns at a constant altitude, and that you get immediate feedback if you can't maintain the height due to a height limit. I'll leave it up to you how you create this height limit. In general, all of my exercises allow you to incorporate variations. Or you can invent exercises yourself. As long as you are challenged but not overwhelmed and you learn something, you are on the right track. The seventh exercise is the slalom with and without height restrictions. You can start without a height limit and, if possible, incorporate a height limit into the exercise. For example, you can fly around the columns in an underground car park and then stretch barrier tape between the columns to create a height limit. What is important with this exercise is that at some point you also practice narrow slaloms with a height limit like I did in this video clip with 3 tables. Big, long slaloms are good to start with, but it takes tight slaloms with height limits to take you to the next level. As with all exercises, it is important that you fly in both directions, to the left and to the right. The eighth exercise is tight curves around columns with and without height restrictions. Or even an 8 around columns, with and without height restrictions. Here again, you can be creative in how you implement this exercise. It doesn't matter if there are 2 trees with barrier tape stretched between them, columns in an underground car park with barrier tape, chairs with barrier tape, or 3 to 4 tables like I did in the video clip. The only important thing is that the exercise challenges you without overwhelming you, and that you learn something and have fun doing it. It is also important that you always train in both directions and train the side that is doing worse more. During this exercise it may happen again that you are unable to maintain your height in the curve. If you notice this, you simply have to focus more on keeping the altitude constant and not unconsciously change the throttle during rudder inputs. You will see that after just a few hours of this exercise you will be able to fly tight turns much better. If you want to become a racer, it's worth practicing this exercise until you can smoothly make fast turns at medium speed. The ninth exercise is orbits around a post without height limits and with height limits. There's not much to say here. If you have mastered all of the previous exercises, this exercise should no longer pose any major problems for you. Here too it is important to keep the height constant, and use pitch to adjust the proximity to the post and correct it with micro movements. Use roll to control the rotation speed around the post, and use rudder to hold the post in the middle of the picture. You can also vary this by pulling something next to the post in the direction in which you turn. But with a proper orbit the post is always in the center of the image. The orbit is a freestyle maneuver and as an exercise it helps to coordinate the throttle roll pitch and rudder. And it's just a cool maneuver that's fun. Here too, it is important to practice both rotational directions. The 10th exercise is a serpentine line or a slalom in the vertical. With this exercise, it doesn't matter how you do the slalom. You can do the slalom with barrier tape that you stretch between trees or between chairs, or you can work with tables like I did in the video clip here. It doesn't matter. The only important thing in this exercise is that you get to know pitch better. If you do this exercise more with throttle, then that's not bad and you'll learn to control the throttle better. But the goal is a bigger slalom where you do more with pitch. This will help you later on racetracks with lots of height differences. I could go on forever, but this video would be too long. However, I would still like to address a few topics. For example, it could be that you feel bad when flying FPV. This is normal because your eyes see movements but your balance system detects a standstill. This can confuse your brain and it reacts with motion sickness. For me, it took about a year before I could fly an FPV for a whole day without feeling sick. And for the first 6 months I could only fly FPV for a maximum of 30 minutes per day without feeling sick. And one day I was motion sick all day because I flew a little too long. The solution for me was relatively simple. I just kept flying until I noticed a slight feeling of nausea and then stopped flying immediately. But there are also other solutions. Simply enter FPV motion sickness on YouTube or Google. Then you can learn what other options there are. Some people can't get used to it. Most people can do it, but some people can't. I hope that this is not the case for you. But there is no guarantee. The second thing I want to talk about is back posture and back pain. FPV flying is not ideal for people with back pain. You may experience back pain or your existing back problems may become worse. That's why make sure you keep your head straight from the start. To do this, you can place the chair against a wall or, if you are flying standing, lean against a wall so that you can always feel when the back of your head is no longer touching the wall. Or you can ask your FPV friends to let you know if you're not sitting up straight. If you want to become a racer or a top freestyler who will have 2,000 hours of flying at some point, then it is absolutely important that you learn from the start to keep your back and neck straight when flying FPV. Otherwise, sooner or later you will develop problems. A third topic is the eyes. FPV goggles and other VR goggles are not particularly good for the eyes and promote drying of your eyes and myopia. So pay attention to your eyes. Take breaks and, for example, fly a little line of sight in between. A fourth topic is the decision to fly in ACRO or angle mode. I'll leave that decision up to you, but I can tell you from my experience that I flew in angle mode for far too long. If I were to start with FPV again now, I would start directly with ACRO mode. A fifth topic is the camera angle of your drone. On some drones the angle is fixed. If it is adjustable, then I would recommend setting as few camera angles as possible for the first few flights. It is easier to fly slowly with a small camera angle than with a large camera angle. With a lot of camera angle, you have the tendency to fly faster. A sixth topic is dealing with boredom. You may find yourself bored with the exercises and frustrated because it takes so long. Here I can simply tell you that it's worth holding on. At some point you will feel the reward of your work. It's difficult at first, but it gets better pretty quickly. And once you reach a certain level, there is no turning back. Then you are addicted to FPV like me. I will stop this tutorial at this point because otherwise it will be too long. I could say a lot more, but not everything fits into one video. Maybe I will do more tutorials in the future. Maybe you're frustrated now because I didn't address something, but a tutorial can almost never be 100% complete. So don't worry and focus on the positive. Nothing else is missing from this tutorial. Focus on what you have learned in this tutorial. Learn to help yourself. Do your own research on the internet. There is already a video for almost every topic, and you will find it if you search with focus and don't allow yourself to be distracted. Use your brain, invest energy, then something comes back. You'll see. I wish you much success in learning to fly FPV. If you have any questions or suggestions, write them in the comments. I appreciate any constructive feedback. Together we can move forward in the FPV community.
Hello my Whoop friends. The Whoop in this video is the Meteor 75 Pro from Beta FPV, but not in the stock version, in my Butterfly FPV version with some modifications. For example, some holes in the canopy as well as in the frame to make it lighter. Direct soldered motor cables to the board without motor plugs. AWG20 main cable. BT 2.0 main connector. Titanium motor screws. And tiny Whoop pinch cam. As well as an OVX 300 VTX from Happy Model. And that's about it. I do have some videos about those modifications and some other videos on my channel. Please check them out.
After these exercises, you will basically already have mastered the basics of FPV flying. If I get enough positive feedback on this video, then I would like to do a second or third part for intermediate and advanced pilots. I also made a how-to tutorial about learning to fly LOS, which you can find on my channel. You can also find other tutorials and other interesting videos there on the subject of FPV. FPV racing and tiny Whoop drones. If you are looking for something specific, then use the internal search function on this YouTube channel. Or ask me in the comments.